The Team 3 of the management and implementation session of the workshop is focused on the financial models. This is one of the most important topics today, and when we do a ICT education project, and we will go in some detail, but this require to dig down in different aspects, and this will be part of extra additional webcasts. We choose 4 items for this webcast. The first is the public budget, namely the budget of education and how to manage the situation related to the public budget in education. The second is the private sector participation in this process of financing education. The third is the international funding available for different projects. And also we choose education finance in the global context. We think it is important today, when we are discussing the new strategy for financing sustainable development of the United Nations and other aspects, to talk about this aspect too. We consider it's very important to discuss in this topic items like cost management, return of investment, tax system, and subventions or donations. Then these 4 topics will be discussed in the different moments of this webcast and in additional webcasts related to financing in education. Let's start to talk about public budget in education. Everybody in education or in finance know this is a very important topic, and it's open discussion in parliaments, in public opinion. It mobilizes people. Then public budget, well management of public budget in every sector, and also in education. Education is that sector where all of this discussion is very important, because it involves a lot of people, families, students, teachers. Everybody is engaged in this discussion. Then to manage the public budget in education is a very important topic, and it's important to discuss this and to learn on these topics everywhere in the world. Before to discuss the different topics, I would like to raise here a document published by the Global Partnership for Education, Guidelines for the Monitoring of National Education Budgets. This document is a document which has just been published not long ago, and it gives to anybody one information on budgets, understanding the budget, in what this represents, what are the main principles, and also analyze the national education budget policy, dialogue and monitoring, and it creates a guide for stakeholder engagement. Then I consider this document as the main document for starting a discussion on the budget of education and education budget in any country. Then I will go down to this document later, but in this moment, in this overview, I want to call the attention for this important document. Another important document in education, maybe today the most important political document international accepted, is the Incheon Declaration and the Framework for Action. And in this document, which is the political decision at international level, it is declared how is important to allocate at least 4 to 6% of the gross domestic product to education, and allocating at least 15 to 20% of public expenditure to education, and will ensure the provision of 12 years of free public funded education. And even it's important to orient private financing resources to education. Then these 4 bullet points are the guideline, the world guideline on budget. It doesn't mean it is enough. It doesn't mean some countries are fulfilling this, but this is the world benchmark. Then, when we discuss budget in education, and especially the national budget, it's important to take in consideration this political declaration, which is the base of many discussions at international level on funding education. I would like now to call the attention for the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, which is a very important source of this expenditure, of the public expenditure in education, and where you can get a lot of information on education finance. This is, of course, a website we need to visit when we want to understand education finance. Now we go to talk about the private sector as a stakeholder in financing, in funding education. There are many aspects related to this. This will be a very wide thematic, very large thematic, and we will try to develop a little bit in this overview some aspects, but this will be a topic which will be more relevant now and in the future, considering then the funding need to develop education to meet the sustainable development goals in education require intervention of the private sector. The first aspect to analyze in the private sector role in funding and investing in education is the areas of investment. Private sector today invest in technology. There are many technology companies coming with innovative solutions for education. This is one of the roles the private sector can have, and very important. Also in infrastructure, there are several examples of investment in infrastructure with different models, and the private sector can play a role in the development of the infrastructure. Also, the private sector, and there are examples, investing in campus, in schools, in different modalities, but this is another area of investment. And student finance. There is huge companies and other type of legal private sector models to invest and support student finance. Of course, this is not covering everything. These are only examples, but in the future webcasts we will develop all these aspects and to have even new or other areas of investment from the private sector in education. Another aspect we want to cover in this webcast is international funding. And the countries, and especially some countries, need and still need support from international institutions, and it is a tool which is available. Then we want to cover this now in this overview. There are many institutions financing and funding education. One of them is the Global Partnership for Education, based on donations and with a very strong program on supporting the countries to develop their education strategy. This will be one of the organizations we will analyze in detail. This is part of the World Bank, but is not based on loans like the World Bank. The World Bank is based on loans like the African Development Bank, for example, and there are others like Asian Development Bank or Inter-American Development Bank. We will look to some of them. We choose now these three for showcase, but this is a wide field which can be explored by the different partners, the different countries to develop their education system. This webcast is an introduction, and as an introduction I want to mention about the education finance global context. We are in the new context, and there are a new strategy involving different aspects, and the United Nations finance strategy for sustainable development. It's a framework we can look at. In this moment, this is a very important aspect, and an aspect related to the sustainable development. The difference between the sustainable development goals and the Millennium Development Goals, which was the program before, is they include the framework for monitoring the development, and also they include the financing framework. We will talk about it later, but on this context, it's very important to mention there is a new strategy and new tools, and it's important to look at them in detail. In this context, it's important to look to the Education Commission and to the report, The Learning Generation, where is clear their assessment. Then we are now spending, for example, in the low and middle income countries, something like $1.3 trillion every year in education. But to achieve the aims, we need something like $3 trillion. Then the difference between what we have today and what we need to meet the goals of SDGs is a very important difference. And also in what concerns the money providing for education in the world from international funding, it is very much below the needs. Then, that said, we need to look to this report in detail and to understand what is the background and how to solve this problem. This is why private sector funding, increasing the national budget on education is essential. In 2030, and we cannot wait until 2030, but because the investments take a long time to implement, but to arrive in 2030 and fulfill the aim of the goals of the SDG 4, the Sustainable Development on Education, we really need these resources. Without these resources, it's not possible to arrive there and to fulfill the aims we decide in 2015. And then we will be in the same situation as we were in 2015, where the Millennium Development Goals were not achieved. And the lack of resources was the main reason for that. Then it's very important to look at this report, and more than that, to find ways to solve the problem of resources for education. In order to introduce the financing for development, for the Sustainable Development Goals, we only mention now the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. This is the result of the Addis Ababa conference in 2015, on financing for development, and this is the basis of the new strategy for financing SDGs. Then we highlight now this document, but we go and look at the document and all the follow-up process which is now going on to define a new strategy for financing development.
Just a final note on this webcast. This webcast is part of an accelerator workshop as a pillar of Sustainable EDU Policy Framework Architecture, a program to support the design and implementation of ICT education projects. Please feel free to visit the website of the program. The link is below in this slide, or contact us by email. It will be a pleasure and an honor to contact to get your feedback and even to establish a partnership to support any ICT education project. Thank you.